Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining this webinar this morning. As Antonio alluded to, we're going to be looking, it's really an introduction to the work that we've been doing on understanding slips and trips in historic properties and the work that we've been doing to develop bespoke guidance. I'd really like to take the opportunity this morning just to give you a heads up on this. We'll be doing a lot of work around this in the coming months, so it's really by way of an introduction for you to the project work that we've been undertaking and an introduction to some of the findings of that. In terms of what we'll cover off today, I'd just like to review what we've been doing around slips and trips, why we're still interested in slips and trips with so many other risks that are prevalent these days, the scope of the work that we've undertaken, what we actually did to understand the challenges that historic properties face in terms of managing slips and trips, and share with you some of the simple, elegant solutions that we've identified as part of that work, and what you can expect next in terms of our activity, in terms of publishing the findings and the results of that work. In terms of the project, though, as an insurer, we look to collaborate on this research project with an organisation, the Health and Safety Laboratory. So who exactly is the HSL? Well, the Health and Safety Laboratory is the world's leading provider of health and safety research solutions. They work with government, industry and other professional bodies carrying out bespoke research projects into a range of health and safety issues. You can see their research facility in that photograph at the top left of the slide that's being presented at the moment. So it's quite a significant research facility that they have. It's based in Buxton in Derbyshire, covering some significant number of hectares, and employs about 800 full-time researchers at the facility. And you can see them there, all very happy and cheerful in the bottom left of the photograph on the slide being presented at the moment. I think the most significant thing for us is in terms of identifying a partner. Essentially, the Health and Safety Laboratory is the research arm of the Health and Safety Executive, the regulator in this country. And that's why we very much wanted to partner with them and collaborate with them in terms of this work and the challenges that historic premises actually face in terms of managing health and safety generally, but slips and trips specifically. As I said, they carry out a range of research services. These cover human factors, occupational health solutions, energy innovation, large-scale testing and process safety. But their falls prevention unit, the unit that we worked with in relation to this specific project, has about 40 years research experience. There's a number of researchers working there, about 5 in total, and they really work to set the standards and the guidance that are used by the regulator. And you can see some examples of that on the right of the slide being shown. Some of the guidance material that they put together in relation to slip resistance of flooring. The image is actually of the research lab that they have there. Here they're trying to measure the coefficient of friction of various surfaces. So this is the slip resistance of various surface materials. It's quite an interesting project that they have there. I'm not sure I would like to be the chap in the safety harness though, because as you may not be able to tell that from the photograph, but essentially that guy is walking on that surface and they're treating it either with oil or water to measure the surface resistance. And at some point, that chap will fall because the platform he's standing on is slowly being inclined. So I'm not sure what sort of risk assessment they've done for that. I'm sure it's adequately covered. But in terms of the project, obviously it's quite a significant project for us. We've partnered with a world-leading research organisation, and effectively we're working collaboratively with the regulator in relation to this. But with all the risks that organisations face these days in the technological age, why are we still talking about slips and trips? I'm not sure that it's the sort of risk that would immediately spring to mind or essentially be in vogue at the moment. But heritage properties attract millions of domestic and international visitors every year. They secure these premises for future generations to enjoy, and the heritage sector creates jobs, boosts the local economy, and secures the UK's global tourism appeal. So in considering the high footfall in relation to slips and trips and the diversity of activities in them, they still remain safe attractions. But slips and trips continue to be the most common cause of accidents for many. And our experience in terms of our claims that we see reflects that, because it remains our biggest attritional loss when it comes to liability. So we can see some evidence of that in the slide that's being viewed at the moment. Slips and trips dominate our liability account from an EL and PL point of view. So for employers' liability, there's something of the order of 37% of the claims are attributed to slips and trips. And obviously from a public liability point of view, that raises a couple of points to about 39%. So for us, slips and trips still feature and dominate our experience quite significantly. The average cost of a claim is somewhere around £27,000, and the causes can be attributable to a range of factors which are shown on the bottom left of the slide as you look at it. So essentially, some of them, a significant proportion of them relate to the premises. So 39% of those relate to the physical conditions in the building. That could be anything from the condition of the floor surfaces, curbing or things of that nature. In relation to housekeeping, so that could be from trailing leads, trailing cables, those sorts of things, cleaning activities generally. 5% of the claims are attributable to the weather. So this is something that we'll be exploring very shortly in terms of walking contaminant, snow, ice, those sorts of conditions. And a range of other risk factors make up the other bucket that we have there in terms of the causes which these could be attributable to. So slips and trips remain a significant attritional loss for us as an insurer, so that's why we're interested in talking about them. And when it comes to the defensibility position in terms of improving that, some of the reasons that we continue to settle claims are attributable to the factors that we've highlighted in the box to the right of the slide. Some of them relate to poor maintenance or inspection regimes being able to demonstrate that a robust system was in place in terms of checking walkways and floor surfaces. Some of it relates to the training and information that's been given to employees. And the other 2 points there, a lot of the time it's related to lack of documentation or being able to demonstrate that significant steps have been taken to prevent slips and trips in the first place, and that systems were in place to monitor what actually is going on in terms of the physical conditions. So slips and trips remain a significant attritional loss for us. That's why we were keen to partner with an organisation to help us identify why this might still be the case, but particularly in relation to historic premises themselves. Obviously, historic premises are not factories or building sites. So by their very nature, they can challenge the standard approaches to preventing slips and trips. Frequently, this is because of the historic nature of the building, the design constraints of that building, or the fabric of the building itself. So all the guidance that has been prepared by the regulator over the years, quite correctly, has probably focused its attention on more traditional workplaces, such as factories, warehouses, and those sorts of facilities. But not a lot of work has been done either to understand why historic properties would challenge the standard approaches to managing slips and trips, and then developing some bespoke guidance for people who are managing these properties in terms of how they might mitigate the risks that they might be confronted with because of the constraints that they're working with, usually the historic fabric of the building. So as the output from this project, we were very keen to develop some practical information for those managing historic properties in terms of what they might do to manage slips and trips in these particular properties, given that there is very little else out there for them to do this. So set against that, what are we actually talking about? Well, here's a typical photograph, a cobble set at historic premises. Obviously a challenging flooring condition potentially for some, particularly if you are frail or elderly or less abled. But this is a typical sort of situation that you might see in a historic property. And the principal challenge, as I mentioned already, is that often this is part of the historic fabric of this building. So the typical solution in terms of identifying flooring or treating that flooring to prevent slips and trips is really not practical in many cases. So identifying practical precautions, simple precautions that can be taken to try and mitigate the risks that might attach to a flooring such as this was really key to the research. And frequently you can get combinations of different flooring types in premises. So here's an example where you've got tarmac, you've got paving slabs, you've got curbing, you've even got rail tracks, which are potentially presenting challenges in terms of how slips and trips might be managed in this particular environment. And again, frequently, from an aesthetic point of view, this situation shows typical floor surfaces that may be encountered where gravel is used from an aesthetic point of view, which can potentially cause a problem in itself. So the very fabric of historic properties can, and particularly the floor surfaces themselves, can present challenges in terms of mitigating slip and trip risk. Here's another example with flagstones. In this case, flagstones they're offering good slip resistance, and if the floor isn't slippery in day-to-day use, everybody walking on it will be protected. And the slip resistance of the flooring offered to a person walking on it usually depends on the surface finish of the floor and if that floor is contaminated in some way. So thinking about flooring and mitigating slip and trip risks can be challenging, simply just looking at some of the historic properties that we've reviewed. Another challenge in historic properties is the condition of floors. Sometimes, obviously, the surfaces can become worn. Frequently, this will be over hundreds of years. So, and it would not be possible or even desirable in some cases to repair them. And frequently, with some historic properties, the steps that they can take to mitigate or maintain walkways can be significantly impacted by constrained budgets. So there is a challenge around that in terms of upkeep and maintenance. The other dimension here, of course, is considering maintaining flooring or steps or stairs for that matter, is that the work can be limited by consents or planning requirements, which is another consideration that needs to be factored in. So in these sorts of situations, practical precautions which are both sensible and proportionate can be adopted to mitigate any slip and trip risk from that. And we were keen to understand what might be done in those circumstances and what might be considered to be best practice or alternatives that people could employ. Having said that, some of the surfaces that we did come across were exceptionally well presented, so it demonstrates what could be achieved in terms of maintaining some walkways and some flooring surfaces. Looking at steps and stairs, typically from a trip point of view particularly, these can present challenges in general workplaces, but also from a historic point of view. Frequently there is huge variation in steps and stairs in historic properties. Frequently they're unique. They will have been made to design standards which were probably not in place at the time they were constructed. And this could mean that there are inconsistencies in terms of the steps and stairs, and as a potential, the risk might be increased in terms of tripping on some stairs which might be encountered. Also, some steps or stairs in historic properties might have been, their original purpose was for a domestic purpose, but that could be changed over time, especially if a property has been opened up to the public and now has a higher footfall in terms of the numbers of people using it. So steps and stairs were also something that we were keen to look at. Here's another example that we encountered, in this case, particularly good set of steps in terms of their design, their consistency, and the way that any potential hazards had been highlighted. A couple of the last points in terms of the challenges around heritage properties relate to, obviously, properties are being accessed by the public. And as I said earlier, in terms of the floor surface, the risk of slipping can be increased by any contamination that is actually introduced on the surface itself. And obviously, if people are walking in and out, if the day is wet, or if there is snow or ice or there is mud, then obviously bringing that in onto potentially slippery floor can increase the risk of slipping at times. So this is an area that can also present challenges. Again, sometimes it's limited because the flooring itself will be part of the historic fabric of the building, and in terms of identifying solutions, a little bit more thought might be required in terms of controlling any contaminant that might be walked in. The other thing is, typically in terms of workplaces, to try and mitigate the risk attached to this, canopies might be fixed to the building outside, or other fixtures which can guard against increased contamination being walked in. Again, this might not be practical in a historic environment, so other solutions are critical, and we're keen to identify those. The last point I wanted to highlight in terms of some of the challenges from a historic point of view is the issue of cleaning. Now, cleaning is, in historic premises, probably similar to a commercial premise that you would encounter, but there can be some challenges in relation to that, which we were keen to address as part of the research project, but not least of which is that typically in any workplace, cleaning is seen as a simple or unimportant part of somebody's job, when from a slip and trip point of view is actually quite important. But obviously in a historic property, you might not have a dedicated cleaning team, and frequently that work might be done by volunteers. So their understanding the importance of good cleaning and surface treatment is quite significant. And we were keen as part of this project to address that and identify practical solutions, simple solutions that people could address to ensure that cleaning was taken seriously. So what do we do in terms of the project itself? Working in collaboration with the researchers from the HSL, we spent a little bit of time looking at what guidance was actually out there for persons in charge or managing historic properties. We scoped out the project and worked out the logistics, but the real significant part is we took a selection of premises, and our research team visited all of those premises, reviewing the procedures that were in place, understanding the specific challenges that those responsible for those premises faced in terms of managing slips and trips. But particularly, we were very keen to identify examples of good practice, or where further practical improvements could be made. Now, we ended up developing a series of guidance modules, which I'll talk a little bit about in a little while. This we based on accepted causation models that the HSE use in terms of trying to explain the risk factors that are attracted to slips and trips. But we were very keen also to share best practice that we found at those particular locations, But really, where we were providing examples, we were trying to focus on cost-effective, sympathetic and elegant solutions that people could adopt to cover off the challenges that they face from a historic point of view. So in terms of what we've done, we've put together, we've completed the research. It's a unique area, as I said earlier, slips and trips. Looking at slips and trips in historic properties specifically is not an area that's been reviewed in the past. We've partnered with the regulator deliberately to try and understand what they would understand would be acceptable in these particular circumstances. As I said earlier, they've got a world-class research department which we partnered with to do that. And we were very keen, if there was something that we could learn from the claims that we experienced, why we typically had to pay out slips and trips claims. So we've put in that 360 perspective. So everything from identifying simple steps people could take to managing slips and trips generally, through to practical solutions that they could adopt for specific risk factors, through to how they might improve their position from a defensibility point of view. All of this material has been peer reviewed. And essentially, you've got a couple of little images there. We were very keen from our point of view as Ecclesiastical. We are supporting the current initiative to help Great Britain work well. The information is posted on the HSE website, and you can just probably make out on the image to the right there our commitment to supporting that strategy. So simplifying risk management guidance to help customers, give them simple advice on what they need to know and what they can do, and trying to avoid unnecessary bureaucracy in terms of doing that. So even when set against insurer requirements, what organisations could practically do and how to reduce the bureaucracy around that. So it very much supports our part of that initiative. So in terms of the content we've developed, this will be being published very shortly. I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. There are quite a range of modules. They're designed to stand alone, but they also supplement each other. So in terms of understanding some of the challenges around historic premises, there's a module on that. We are very keen to talk about, and you have to talk about a little bit, the legal landscape that sits around slips and trips and what we've learned from that. So obviously there's a module on slips and trips and the law, and that's particularly interested when you get into environments where typically you might not have an employer-employee relationship, where you might have large groups of volunteers managing premises, and how the law actually applies to them. So there's a module that deals with that. One module sets out a simple approach to managing the risk from slips and trips. So that deals with everything from potentially setting out policy right through to inspections and checks that people can make in terms of their conditions and evidencing actually what they do. One of the contentious issues that in terms of health and safety generally is still around risk assessment and the documents that are produced. So we've looked at that specifically from a slip and trip point of view. We set that against a historic or heritage backdrop. So some of the planning constraints or consents that might be required in terms of assessing risk. So we've got a module covering that. Just jump in a couple. We've got the last module deals with our findings around claims defensibility and slips and trips, highlighting some of the key issues that attach in terms of that. Significantly, those last but two bullet points where we're talking about preventing slips and preventing trips, here we've developed simple modules, modular information, covering the risk factors that typically attach to slipping and tripping. And here we've applied the HSE's, what they term the slip potential model. This identifies the key risk factors which contribute or can contribute to someone slipping. And as you can see, it highlights a number of these. Now, it may be that in some circumstances an accident might be attributable to one of these. More frequently, it would be a combination of those factors. But this could be everything from cleaning, contamination, the issue of footwear, the flooring, those sorts of issues that we were talking about, and some of the challenges that I was talking about from a historic point of view earlier. These are the risk factors that are identified from a slip potential point of view, and we've covered off each of these factors in the guidance that we've prepared. Similarly, the HSE uses a model to try and explain and identify the risk factors that contribute to trip hazards. Here, obviously, trips happen when someone catches their foot on an unexpected obstacle. That could be an uneven paving slab, something of that nature. This triangle tries to explain those risk factors. So it talks about design and maintenance issues from a trip point of view, the housekeeping issues that we identified, and the walkways themselves. So we've adopted the HSE's model in terms of trying to explain and articulate the risk factors that contributed to that. But the critical thing is that we have written this based on the findings of the research that we've conducted, and it is written from a historic property point of view. So the modules that relate to those risk factors, they have a similar structure. So essentially it talks about some of those factors and the science that sits behind that. So why flooring is a particular issue from a slip point of view, and the science that might explain why somebody would slip on that. Now that might sound a little bit complicated, but essentially it's putting forward in plain terms why someone might slip on some flooring. What we've also done as part of this exercise is we've identified the best practice precautions that can be adopted. So this would be, if you were in any organisation, the 5 or 6 top key best practice solutions for preventing slips or trips in relation to those factors that we've covered off. But obviously we wanted to set the context around that from a historic property point of view, given the challenges that I've been talking about from a slip and trip point of view earlier. So from that point of view, we cover off the challenges that we've identified from a historic property point of view. So we understand and we can context the best practice solutions that have been put forward in those situations. And given that, if circumstances don't permit, for whatever reason that might be from a historic property point of view, then what other possible solutions can be used and identified to try and mitigate any risk that might attach to that. So just to share with you for the last couple of minutes some of the key findings, a little bit of science, because I wanted to just talk about steps to start with. So some of the terminology that might that I might use around this. This little diagram tries to explain that from a step point of view. So some of you may not be familiar with steps in significant detail. It's not something that we consciously pay much attention to every day of the week. But in terms of the terminology, the tread of the step is the part that of the stairway that is stepped on, that you can see in the diagram there. The going is the depth of the tread, so you can see that in the upper portion of the diagram to the left. And the rise of a step, that's the vertical portion between each tread on the stair. So just to give you that terminology. But the bit I wanted to talk about first was really in terms of nosing. Now the nosing is the edge part of the tread that protrudes over the riser. Beneath it, as you can see in that diagram, probably central there's an arrow pointing to the nosing there. Now the nosing is important because obviously that's something that we don't pay much attention to it in normal circumstances, but it's quite important because subconsciously that's where we're thinking about putting our feet as we use stairs. And here's some good examples of what we found when we were doing the research, where the nosing of those steps have been very simply highlighted in terms of the nosing and interaction with the people misplacing their feet. So very well highlighted, some good practical examples here, simple solutions that could be adopted. But a number of sets of stairs we came across as shown in this photograph, where you probably might not want to use the omnipresent yellow and black tape, hazard warning tape, not very sympathetic to the building itself, a nice set of stairs in our historic premises. So one of the solutions that we identified, which was very well received, was that on the nosing of these steps, whether it was actually possible, given any consents that might be required, whether they could potentially stain that nosing with a different varnish. Now that doesn't have to be a significant stain, but just a darker shade or a lighter shade would make that nosing more visible. These steps, believe it or not, were used quite significantly. The room that they open out up to was used for quite a lot of functions, and here they were bringing in food and drink and all sorts of things. So it was perceived as a potential issue at this particular location, and that was a solution that went down particularly well. Here's another circumstances, steps again, and a particular concern with this one was that these led down to some premises in a historic property that were used for events. And obviously, particularly in the winter, those events, the evenings get darker, and the issue here was about lighting those steps. And again, there was a concern over, fixing typical industrial lighting to them. So one of the solutions that we identified here was perhaps using LED lighting, perhaps strip lighting that could be fixed or attached under the handrail. This is freely available, can be bought very easily and can be used in these particular circumstances. Very easy to install, very easy to maintain, and very cheap. So a very practical option that was identified here. The next one, just by way of example, here's a set of steps. They may not first appear as steps because obviously it's been raining, but in the foreground you can probably just make out that there is some steps there. That actually looks like a level walkway that you might see there, but behind there is this set of steps. So here we were talking about the potential use of planters, just to highlight that there was a particular hazard that could be identified here, just to make that a little bit more visible, perhaps when the environmental conditions might not be as good in terms of identifying the potential hazard that might sit behind them. And the last example I just wanted to share with you, simply mowing the grass can actually just help in terms of nudging visitors to premises to adopt a safe footpath, a safe walkway, redirecting them away from a particular hazard. So here's a good example where this has been done to try and nudge people to follow a particular set route around a historic property, and that can be used very effectively to move people away from a potential hazard and influence the way that they actually use those premises. I'm just conscious of time, so moving away from some of the specific risk factors, as I said earlier, the modules also cover some of the general findings that we identified as part of the work. So this relates to some of the legal aspects, particularly how they apply in non-employer situations, and this will be particularly relevant to smaller organisations, particularly if they are predominantly reliant on volunteers. One of the other modules deals with risk assessment and the challenges from a historic property point of view when it comes to slips and trips in terms of completing those. And the last module really is, as I say, completing this 360 review of the whole issue around slips and trips is what we've learned from a defensibility point of view and some of the things that can be addressed to improve that moving forward. So just to summarise really, from a slip and trip point of view, because of the very nature of the premises themselves, they can be challenging to identify simple solutions. But really what we're advocating as part of this guidance is a sensible and structured approach to manage them. A simple, proportionate response is required. even given the legal constraints that many organisations might be working under. There are other solutions to and precautions that can be adopted, set against some of the challenges that we've identified. These precautions can be sympathetic to the building, they can match the aesthetic of the premises, they can be simple, cost effective, as I said. So what we've tried to do in the guidance is set out some practical tips and advice. It is aimed specifically at customers managing historic premises, and it is unique for them. And as I say, and I said at the start of the session, working with the Health and Safety Laboratory and that research arm, working with their researchers with the many years experience that they have in terms of addressing slip and trip issues in premises and applying that knowledge to historic premises has put us in good shape in terms of identifying exactly what is practical. So what you can expect next? Well, in a very short period of time now, we will be updating our website pages with the modular PDFs and a lot of interaction there in terms of helping customers identify this information and use this information in a practical way. There's quite a social media campaign that we've got planned in terms of this. You'll be receiving postcards about how to access this information and use this information with your customers to address this particular issue. We've got some further topic webinars planned in the future around some of the specific risk factors that I've talked about. And obviously we've been recording this webinar today, so you'll be able to access that at a future point in time. So I hope this has been a useful session for you, just to give you an introduction to the topic and the work that we've been doing. And I also hope that it's given you a little bit of heads up, a little bit of advance notice in terms of what we've done. And we hope that you can take this information and use it practically with your customers in the future to help us reduce the risk from slips and trips. So with that, I'd like to throw it out to if there's any questions.
If you'd like to just add any of your questions, if you have them, to the Q&A tab that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, we will take a couple of questions. Okay, it doesn't look like we've got any just at the moment, but if you do have any questions at any time, obviously you can always contact us, and you can contact me directly, Antonia Coles. You should have my details and I can forward them on to Hugh and we can get some answers back to you. The various material that Hugh has been talking about, we hope to be launching at the end of the month / the beginning of June. So please look out for that. And the further webinars will be specifically on people and that interaction with slips and trips in historic properties, with maintenance and with the design, the fabric of the building. Those will be rolled out in approximately the summer, June, July, September sort of time, in Q4. So please look out on the selected for you emails for details on those. But if we don't have any questions, we will wrap up now. So I'm going to stop recording, and thanks ever so much for participating today. And as I say, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks very much. Goodbye.